Hello, I'm David Green from Harloxton College. My research and published work deals with Britain, Ireland and France in the later Middle Ages. I have particular interests in the Hundred Years' War, conceptions of chivalry and nobility, and in the career of Edward Black Prince. Today I'd like to think about a source and a subject which deals with a number of those issues, the life of the Black Prince. This is a verse biography written by an author known only to us as Chandos Herald, who was the herald of Sir John Chandos, one of the Black Prince's most respected comrades in arms. Now, the first thing that people usually want to know about the Black Prince is why he was called the Black Prince. This wasn't a contemporary designation. Indeed, the first known usage dates from the mid-16th century, whereas the prince himself lived from 1330 to 1376. There's no indication that the prince wore black armour, as is sometimes suggested. However, his so-called arms of peace, the coat of arms he wore during tournaments, comprised 3 ostrich feathers on a black background, like a field. So that may explain them. Alternatively, and this is just a theory, Edward gained a notorious military reputation in a series of campaigns which he fought against the French and their allies in the Hundred Years' War. And it may be that the name Black Prince was given to him by the French to reflect the negative connotations the colour had at the time. Now, if that's correct, it links rather nicely with the passage from the verse biography of Edward's life that I'd like to consider. The biography was written somewhere in the early 1380s, certainly by 1385, probably a few years earlier. It's one of a number of similar sorts of chivalric works written in verse, which were composed in the late 14th and early 15th centuries. The other particularly famous example that we have is the biography of the Constable of France, Bertrand du Guesclin, by an author called Cuvelier. Apart from his association with John Chandos, we know very little, frankly, about the author of this work. However, the French dialect in which the biography was written suggests he was originally from the Low Countries, perhaps from Hainaut. Now, this province had close links to the English court, because the Black Prince's father, King Edward III, married Philippa, daughter of the Count of Hainaut. And it was through this link and through Philippa's patronage that a number of authors found service in the English court. Perhaps the most famous of these is Jean Froissart, who wrote extensive chronicles about this period, certainly took a very close interest in the lives of the aristocracy and in deeds of arms performed in the Hundred Years' War. Chandos Herald was an eyewitness to many of the events which took place later in the prince's life. His biography is especially valuable for understanding the campaign Edward fought in Castile in the later 1360s. The description of this expedition forms the most detailed part of the biography. The earlier sections, however, are accurate for the most part, and it's clear that the author spoke with those who were themselves witnesses to the prince's earlier campaigns to France. And it's a brief extract concerning one of those expeditions that we'll consider. First, though, you might be wondering why, in the course of the Hundred Years' War, conflict fought between England and France, the Black Prince, the heir to the English throne, was fighting in Castile, in Iberia and Spain. The answer really shows why the Hundred Years' War was such an involved conflict. It also goes some way to explain why the Hundred Years' War lasted so long. Although the two main protagonists were England and France, the conflict drew many other countries and regions into its orbit. Castile, Scotland, Flanders, the Empire are only a few. And because of these different elements, the political and geographical focus of the war shifted over the course of the struggle. The origins of the Hundred Years' War are equally complex, and you might be interested in exploring some of these in more detail at another time. There are longer and shorter term causes. One element which bound these various factors together was the status of Gascony. This duchy, located in southwestern France with Bordeaux as its capital, was hugely valuable, and it was held by the English. It was a remnant of the great Angevin Empire, which had come together during Henry II's reign in the 12th century. However, the terms under which Gascony was held by the English in the 14th century was a subject of huge dispute. Now, there isn't time to do this subject justice today, but just consider some of the potential problems that could arise in this situation. The King of England was also the Duke of Gascony. As Duke of Gascony, he was the vassal of the French king. He owed the King of France obedience as his overlord. The ultimate arbiter of justice in Gascony was the King of France. Technically, the Duke of Gascony owed military service to the French king. And yet, as King of England, this same man was also a sovereign monarch. So essentially, the King of England was suffering from a major identity crisis. As a result of this, his position as Duke of Gascony might undermine his position as King of England. It might stop him from acting in what he saw as England's best interests because of the allegiance he owed the King of France in his other persona as the Duke of Gascony. Of course, in reality, frankly, his interests as King of England tend to have predominance. In any case, this isn't time for a detailed consideration of the origins of the 100 Years' War. Suffice to say, tensions rose throughout the later years of the 13th century and first decades of the 14th century. Small-scale skirmishes were a regular feature. Then, in 1328, the death of the last king of the French Capetian dynasty meant that Edward III of England gained a claim to the French throne. So that added a further dimension to this growing friction. By comparison with this, the final reason for the outbreak of war in 1337 really seems rather prosaic. Edward III took in, he harboured Robert of Artois, a disgraced French nobleman, essentially a renegade. He'd fled French justice, he'd fled legal charges brought against him. Edward refused to hand him over to French justice. And so King Philip VI of France used his authority over Edward in his persona as the Duke of Gascony to declare Edward had failed in his duties, and so he confiscated the Duchy of Gascony. And as a result of that, what we've chosen to call the 100 Years' War began in 1337. Frankly, it's not an ideal name, as the war wouldn't end until 1453. The first years of the conflict saw Edward seek to build a European alliance against the French. This proved expensive, and frankly, it achieved very little. It was only in 1346 that the English were able to strike a major blow in a military engagement on land. And it was during this campaign that Edward III's eldest son, the Black Prince, first saw combat. Chandos' Herald describes the first phase of that campaign. It begins at line 145. As you can read, immediately after landing in France, the king knighted his eldest son. The Herald then compares the deeds of arms performed by the English, including the prince, to those performed by legendary heroes such as Roland and Oliver, and who he describes as the courteous Ogier the Dane. That word courteous might be interesting for later discussion. He then goes on to say, the prince made a right goodly beginning. So this is his beginning as a knight. This is the start of his chivalric. And how does he do this? How does he make this goodly beginning? By burning and laying waste the countryside and assorted towns. So according to Chandos Herald, who was writing a biography which was designed to glorify his subject, this was chivalric behaviour. This was entirely laudable. It suggests an attitude to chivalry, which focuses on prowess and military success as the central elements in the chivalric. It suggests there was nothing intrinsically ignoble or dishonourable in waging what amounts to socio-economic warfare on those outside chivalry. So this is clearly a very different definition of chivalry than many would have. But we should also note that the behaviour of the chivalric elite was subject to huge amounts of criticism in the later Middle Ages by both English and French authors. You could read works by Chaucer or John Gower or Christine de Pizan and find completely contrasting attitudes to those Chandos Herald expresses. Or you could read Froissart's Chronicles and find warfare described as being essentially like a tournament, as being like a game for gentlemen. The 100 Years' War subjected England and France to extensive and deeply brutal periods of violence. And the position of the military elite, the chivalrous community, was called into question as a result. Chandos Herald's biography offers a valuable perspective on a period of enormous change, but it is only one perspective. I hope you find it interesting. Thanks very much.